there's any plane noises, it's because the Blue Angels have a show going on today. Can you hear me?
All right, what's up, everyone? What's going on? Let me try to figure this out. All right. How we doing today? Looks like we are having some problems with the internet connection for some reason. I think it might be a YouTube thing. Can you guys hear me? Are you guys receiving everything all right? It looks like it's a little bit, it's buffering. Can you hear me? Justin?
I can hear you good.
Okay. It seems like our connection's pretty decent, but on YouTube's end, it's showing a poor connection. How can you guys? Can somebody leave a comment here in the comment section or the live chat? Let me know how it's sounding, how it's looking. It looks like it's kind of jumping around a bit.
You want me to turn my video off?
No, it shouldn't. It shouldn't be you. I think it's on my end for some reason. Anybody out there? Can you catch this? Can hear but jerky. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Of course. Right when
you want to state?
No, it's not you. It's my internet for some reason. It's always it's been fine.
If you restart your browser, will it end up ending the meeting?
Yeah. So unless I pull it up in a different browser, it keeps. Oh my god. Yeah, that's. My gosh, come on.
Okay, so people are saying audio is good, visuals are jumpy, so I could just stop my video for a minute and see what's up.
No,
just in case it helps.
No, I don't think it's that. Although that now it's saying it's excellent. Can you guys hear me now? Audio is good. Visuals a bit jumpy.
Yeah, because I'm looking at the video here, and mine was jumpy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, it's showing excellent connection now, so maybe it's not as jumpy.
Let's just do that for now. We can try going on later with something else. Maybe if I do my dire board illustrations again.
Well, I normally have video when I talk with people, so I don't think it shouldn't be your video. But anyways, we're here. How you doing today, brother?
Good, man. How are you?
Doing great. How are you and the family?
We are. We're making it. We're trying to focus on things we have control over.
Right.
And learning a big lesson over the past 60 days now.
Right.
Getting ready to go into the Lenten season. I was all fired up, ready to take a whole week off, and then complete reversal. And being a newcomer, it's very interesting. But big boys learn from difficulty and struggle. So.
Right. So, how are your kids understanding all this stuff? How are you explaining what's going on?
Well, Colin's doing good. He's 7.5 months now. He's a little bruiser. He's great. And then Camille is 10, so she kind of takes it in stride. But obviously, it's not just not going to church. It's not going out as often. It's also not going to school. So it's difficult. But we're a tight family, so we're all kind of homebodies while we're home, and we end up doing adventurous stuff when we're not.
Mm-hmm.
So we make best of both situations, but right now it's just making best of the situation.
Right.
It definitely is different and difficult, but
right. Well, without further ado, what we're going to talk about today. So some of you guys probably caught Justin and I's previous conversation on Eastern traditions. We talked a lot about our own experience within martial arts, dabbling into Buddhism and Taoism and Hindu ideas, and Justin was in Falun Gong. So you guys may have checked out that video. We're going to kind of continue that conversation, but maybe approach it in a little bit different angle. What I was hoping to do is talk about the sort of commodification of the sort of Eastern spiritual traditions, and the idea behind it was how, well, generally speaking, I feel like Eastern traditions, when brought to the West, they're transfigured in one way or another. And a lot of times I think they're transfigured in terms of a sort of consumeristic, capitalistic framework, which then I think leads to then the New Age, the 1960s counterculture, the appropriation of all this stuff in different ways. So we were wanting to just talk about Eastern traditions, generally speaking, talk about their ideas, the ideologies, and then how I think, how Justin sees them being commodified. So that's kind of what we had on the agenda. Is there anything you want to say, Justin, before getting into it?
Yeah. I mean, just a couple things to preface. I mean, first off, I make no presuppositions or presumptions that I am degreed in world religious studies like David, the real Med White, or Jay, or Patrick here, or anybody else. But I do have real world experience in Eastern philosophy that had so many similarities to the other pagan traditions that it's almost, you could almost overlap nearly everything. Mm-hmm. And so where I would be able to approach the house from the outside and maybe look in the window, the great part about what Patrick does is he dissects every interior part. And so hopefully, and we tend to get along in these conversations well because of his practical experience and his formal education on it and where I come from. So again, I don't make any presumptuous positions on knowing everything there is to know about the pagan traditions, the Eastern traditions, but I do see several patterns come up. Mm-hmm. And I do see that all the physical practices like yoga, like Qigong, like Tai Chi, like other types of pagan traditions that try to incorporate some body transformation to prepare for body abandonment is really the idea and the purpose behind it is abandoned, like you're saying, in the West. They think it's just physical practice and physical exercise, but the entire philosophy of yoga and the physical practice is what they call transformation of body. It's for the purpose of abandoning the body. That's the whole purpose of it. Right. So the philosophy of use behind those types of physical practices is the abandonment of the body. But first you have to abandon thoughts. Then you can abandon the material existing world, because they associate both together. Right? So that's kind of how I see the importance in understanding this, that there's no synergistic melding together between Western and Eastern or pagan and patristic teachings. As we talked about in the last video, if your start in your hypostatic being is in the ether, in the Tao, then this whole world's an accidental. So of course you want to abandon it. It's temporary. Right. But if your hypostatic being begins here and is meant to be here, that's a whole different approach. Right. Totally different. It's 180 degrees. So the methods used to get there are also totally abandoned. So I kind of look at it like that, and I kind of look at it like, the summation of all that I can see, at least, of philosophy and religion, especially Eastern religions, can be summarized in the pursuit of that common principle between the relationship between the one and the many. What is that universal attribute or substance? What is it? And they don't know. Some of them come up with ideas like the Buddhist swastika, or the yin yang symbol, or the yoga symbol for Om or whatever. And there's many others like stars and stuff like that. But it's meant to represent that shared common principle, that principle of all things. But they think it's divine. Right. So therefore, they think all things have that divine essence, and there's no separation between divine essence and created essence. Mm-hmm. And that's why they think even the gods like Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva will be annihilated back into a divine essence with some type of a divine thought, panpsychism, or some type of ascensience, and then be reformed into new gods in the next phase. So that is, to me, identifying how the patristic and Christian theology takes care of that with the Logos Logi doctrine. Right. That is the shared similarity between the two. Right. And so that's kind of how I will look at it.
And that Logos Logoi doctrine is essential with the energy essence. I mean, that to me, that's what really was the big doorway that got me into orthodoxy, was seeing the uniqueness of the energy essence distinction and why that is so important, and then why that's then unique on world religions. Because as you're mentioning, I think a lot of the guys that that we're all sharing content online with Dyer and Father Deacon Ananias or David the Real Medwide or Sneck, we all have sort of different expertise, if you will. And, some of those guys know way more than I do in regards to the nitty gritty of Orthodox theology, or Jay's going to be vastly superior to me in terms of comprehensive understanding of philosophy. I think one of the things that I have a specialty at is because of my studies are in world religions. And so I think and I'm not trying to say better than anybody else. I'm just trying to say what I think maybe is my strong point in regards to these conversations regarding orthodoxy is my understanding of other world religions and the sort of doctrines, the worldviews, the ideas and stuff like that. And that's why I enjoy hopping on here with you and talking about Eastern traditions and stuff like that, because we don't talk about it as much, and I think that it's really useful, to everybody listening, because not everybody's gone through these same journeys. But sure. But anyways, to begin, I think yoga is a perfect place to start. And so one of the things that I wanted to do with this idea of the commodification of Eastern spirituality is, in a recent video, I talked about the sort of commodification of religion, generally speaking, and the term in regards to sort of purchasing religion in the spiritual marketplace. I talked about this in my video on secularism as the religionless religion of America, and that because we live in a secular society, the ultimate value structures then are embedded with secular values like the marketplace. And that's why we get these ideas about the spiritual marketplace, this or that. And I'm not trying to frame any dialectic between socialistic ideas of economic structure versus capitalistic structure, anything like that. But I do want to talk about this sort of purchasing of Eastern traditions. And I think one of the more obvious dimensions of that is yoga and yoga mats and yoga pants and practicing yoga, and you're, doing your downward dog and your sun salutation, and what this represents about yourself, because now there's a whole framework within Western society that somehow once you go down this worldview, you're actually more spiritual, you're actually more intelligent, you're more enlightened, you're more worldly. And so there's all these characteristics that then people are associated with by really just purchasing an idea, a wardrobe, a perception. And so the first thing I wanted to talk about then was yoga itself. And yoga as a phenomenon, you have all these yoga studios, and I wanted to let you kind of go down what you wanted to say about yoga. Yes, yoga means union, actually means yoke. So yoga is a sort of Anglo form of yoke. So I wanted you to talk about maybe your general ideas on yoga before getting into, I wanted to talk about what are the three main branches of yoga and how the Western concept of yoga is so divorced from all the spirituality that we're going to talk about as well. Like a lot of the women, a lot of the men who go to these yoga studios, they might make reference to Hindu or Buddhist or Eastern spiritual ideas, but they have no idea what they're getting into. They're still totally rooted in a sort of Western framework, and they're just consuming. They're just consuming these spiritual traditions as what it says about themselves. And so
Sure.
I wanted to get into the various schools of yoga, how yoga is actually a very complex thing. Not that we would support it at all, because it ultimately is a dead end, and it's about self-enlightenment. It's about self-deification, and it's not about theosis. It's all, and so it ties into even what I was talking about in a previous video on the sort of dissolution of the ego, and that being the sort of main thrust that we're going to see within these Eastern traditions. But before we get into maybe some of the more detailed understandings of different yoga schools, do you want to make any comment about the sort of commodification and how something like yoga is brought into the West, and now it's a product and people purchase it, and now it's an identity and it says all these things about themselves?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the comments was means union. Well, what it's unionizing itself with, they believe, and look, I can only speak to what my Buddhist Qigong practices, and Qigong is a Chinese version of yoga. It emanated from India, came to China. Did China have its own practices in certain avenues? Yes, and Taoism and so forth, but that's a different approach to a similar problem of that association between your substance and the universal singular substance. Mm-hmm. So if thought is abandoned while in meditation practice, and those precepts of samadhi, samadhi is concentration, precept, samadhi, wisdom. And so if those three are the guiding posts of Brahmanism, which became Hinduism, it is also the same type of concept in all Eastern traditions. And so an Eastern tradition of, say, for instance, Qigong, like I did, the idea is to abandon all thought and go into a state of wu wei, but similar with yoga. So I didn't do yoga, I did basically Chinese yoga. Mm-hmm. So yes, you are meant to, while in practice, sitting with two legs up, which is very difficult, and ignore all the pain that you get sitting there for an hour or two, like what I've done, and other practices or exercises standing. But while sitting there, the idea is not only to discipline yourself to stay in that state of complete disconnect and emptiness while your whole body is aching from sitting there so long. It's literally to train you to teach, like a mental practice, teach you to treat even the physical pain you have in your body as an illusion, and you have to ignore it. And you do get to a point where you ignore it. So why this is the problem I find as secular people. As soon as you treat it as an escape from problems so you can relax and go into a meditation for 20 minutes to an hour, you come out of your practice, yoga studio, whatever, out of the forest, and your problems are still there in the real world. So unless you're doing what the traditional teachers and the esoteric schools, and especially China, say, that you can't just do cultivation practice, which is, or the physical practice. You have to do what they call cultivation practice,
Right.
which is cultivating your heart, that xing that we talked about
Right.
before, raising your heart and mind nature, your moral quality. So unless you're improving yourself, the physical practice doesn't mean anything in their school, And so you won't be able to reach stillness. And I've been there like halfway through doing deep meditation, and all of a sudden I'll have this memory of when I was like 7, or some worry I have about something going on in business or whatever. It just pops up like a mirror. It's crazy. But that's just from being relaxed. So what good is it to relax yourself from the problems of the world if you don't have the tools to go and solve those problems later and interact with people properly? So oftentimes you see the physical practice without that. And we all know that. We see people from the far left. We see people from misguided walks of life go into a yoga studio and they talk about being good. They walk out the studio and they join an Antifa rally. And it has no connection. If you truly believe in gaining karma that holds you back in samsara from they believe at the final judgment, returning back to the one before the explosion of the universe, you would fear doing wrong and making your next life miserable. You would accumulate virtuous acts rather than going and acting like that.
Right.
But what do? And I seen it in what I did. They do something stupid and then they try to unwind it and compensate it by going and doing more physical practice or doing charity or whatever. And so they truly treat it as if they're taking on the substance of evil or sin, karma.
Right.
So how is that union in the comment section met? Well, as we talked about before, that symbol of the Tai Chi where your primordial virtue and person is there, but your sick side, your karma-filled side is also there, the black and white. The more black that you have, the longer you're going to be here, and the less of your original self will be preserved at the end of ages. So when that self is still preserved, even if it's a small part, that's when it goes back into union with what the Western tradition might call the monad or whatever,
Right.
whatever it is, the oneness.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what they believe. So you're only doing damage to yourself if you do the physical practice without the cultivating your heart and everything else. But I mean, who talks about that? They say it, but do they lead by example? Do they do it?
Right.
And as we've seen, a lot of us that have come out of Western religious traditions, we more or less left those and didn't give them a second chance because of people not doing what they're asking you also to do.
Exactly. Yeah, I honestly wonder how many people that participate in these worldviews or these physical practices, because as you're pointing out, once we're, just like we were starting talking about yoga, this is way more complex and comprehensive in terms of a worldview, a paradigm, than just bending over and stretching the body and increasing flexibility and fitness and stuff like that.
You're better off doing regular physical exercise and then going to an Anthony Robbins seminar of self-improvement instead of just doing yoga or Tai Chi if you're not going to improve your life.
Right. No,
because it's not going to do it for you. There's a concept in Qigong, they call it Qi Ji. There are allegedly energy mechanisms that divine beings give to you to transform your karmic substance into virtue and then transform later on. But these are all teachings that you have to demonstrate. So obviously we don't believe in that, but yeah, I mean, anybody can claim anything, but demonstrating it is different, and demonstrating a true transformation of a person, a good person. And so that's why I'm saying that you're trying to live a monastic life while accumulating all the problems of living amongst regular people. that only works if you're disconnected from anything by just going and being a monk in a Buddhist monastery or a Hindu whatever.
Right.
So it's taking one part of it and then not following the rest, and then you expect some type of result. Or why is it so chaotic in those circles all the time?
And that highlights why I wanted to frame this video as a sort of commodification, because it's Westerners mostly bringing these practices into their lives as a way to, well, for them, I guess, incorporate more meaning, have more spirituality, something even phenomenological, something that you experience. But they do it in a way in which they don't want to give up the lifestyle that they already have. And therefore, it just becomes a product that they consume to put next to something else that they already have, another commodity, another thing, as opposed to how these things are actually understood in their original context are very different. And they actually don't bode well with the way a lot of people use them. And that's why I wanted to start off framing this video as how Eastern traditions are transfigured in the West, and really Western traditions have been transfigured in the West. And everything has been commodified, if you will. And one of the things about the Eastern Orthodox Church that I think is interesting is they seem to have not commodified, if you will, like so many others have. And I was just curious, because this is something that I've been thinking about, because I've been wanting to incorporate like t-shirts and stuff like that on my website. And where is a line crossed? Whereas you can buy Buddha heads and prayer beads, and we're going to get into all this stuff. But within the Eastern Orthodox context, I thought about offering, traditional Orthodox things, that I could sell. But then I started thinking, well, geez, this was before this video. This is something I'd already been thinking about. But I feel like, well, dang, you're falling right back into the same problem. That's why I don't even have an Orthodox prayer rope, because I didn't want to just go on Amazon and buy one. I wanted it to have deeper meaning than that. I wanted it to be me going to a particular monastery and they're having, maybe I purchase it from them because they made it and they can, there's a different context to it than the sort of sterilized form of purchasing spirituality. And it seems like Orthodoxy isn't in that same boat as some of the other world religions. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I do see, whether it's a commodification of religious items or trying to ecumenically blend, for instance, in the West, Catholicism or anything else with the world social changes, that to me, that's also a commodification. In Buddhism, they call it plundering the Dharma. If you go and start your own sect, yet you have been trained in the sutras and in a particular school, Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana, Chen, it doesn't matter. If you take them to be your own words, it's considered to be a sin. If you take a Buddha statue and you make it without the approval and consecration, of a monk, then that is also committing a wrongdoing. They believe destruction of Buddha statues and other deities' statues are also a wrongdoing. Using Buddha heads, showing and displaying any divine being in some type of a broken manner, like without a head, without an arm or whatever, they think that you have to destroy that image because that is representing divine beings, and that's a sin to show them like that. I'm just telling you what they believe. Mm-hmm. So when you see somebody have a restaurant, they call it Zen Asian cuisine or whatever, and then they have a Buddha head there that's taken directly from some temple in Thailand or whatever. A real traditional monk would consider that a sin. Right. So using it for a commercial purpose, let alone displaying it in ways that are already set up for, 2,400 years in Buddhism. So to assume that there's not an established code of conduct in various traditions. Now, Hinduism is more do as thou will. You can pretty much, depending on the sect that you join, it's pretty much do as thou will.
Right.
Yeah. So, but as far as Orthodox doing that, I don't see Orthodox doing that. I don't see too many. And even if some are, making things or making icons or whatever else, it seems to be, in my opinion, as a newcomer, it seems to be, if it's done properly, be doing a good thing. It's making more products available.
Right.
But like
and usually they're from monasteries. So there's a different connection in regards to the tradition. And then because we can't get out, that's where another thing I wanted to talk about in this video is that there's a hazy ambiguity in regards to this sort of commodification. Even though I think what we're talking about in regards to yoga and the purchasing of spiritual personas is true, there's also you can't go too far with it, because at the end of the day you have to, everything's you still purchase things, you're still consuming things, and not all of it is the same sort of commodification. And so I agree with you with the Orthodox framework, and sort of seems like most of the stuff's rooted in monasteries. There's a tradition that's connected to it, and then by purchasing it you're actually helping those monasteries. So I agree with you. There seems to be a little bit different, and it seems to be structured in a way that it's not, the Joel Osteens of the world. Protestantism, I would say parts of Catholicism have certainly gone down the same rabbit hole of a sort of commodified form of religion. I mean, look at candles in Mexican Catholicism, right? With they're all products, and then even though there is a traditional rooting there, you're not buying them from monasteries. You're buying them from these companies that make tons and tons of candles, and you got the Saint Muerte or whatever is one of the more popular ones amongst the gangs right now. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I'm sure some of the people out there are.
No, but I do see a similarity in problems in the East and West. We're discussing a subject that is supposed to be under the direction and authority to those that have preserved the tradition of the subject we're talking about. And so, if you're talking about, again, taking it from the subjective to the objective, speaking about Buddhism or whatever, in the Theravada and very old Mahayana sects, you can't just go out there and just start telling people about the Dharma. You can't just say, "Hey, I'm Buddhist." I mean, there's like a ton of rituals, a ton of studies. You can't misquote. That's also considered a sin, because they think when you speak, it is eternal, even if you're a mortal human, and therefore speaking out loud the sutras incorrectly damages the Dharma. And they think that's damaging the Fa. So whenever somebody goes to a Buddhist temple and they see these two scary-looking demon type of statues, they're not demons. They are actually called Fa guardians. And what they are charged with, they believe, by the Buddhas in their heavenly paradise, is to guard every single character and word that is spoken by divine beings, so that when somebody plunders it, they bring themselves destruction, whether in this life or the next. So are we that careful also? Well, Zen Buddhism doesn't do that. So they're like the Protestants. Like you're saying, Joel Osteen or whatever. You can pretty much say what you want, think what you want. They take the approach, well, you can think of God as one way, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. And then anything after that is pretty much an observation on your own of what you think Christianity is.
Right.
You don't have to rethink Christianity. It's already been done. You don't have to rethink some of these things. So the way I'm looking at it, making discussions about, Thomism versus Palimism, it's a straw man. It's not Palimism. It's what was taught since the beginning, especially when it was clarified by the Cappadocian Fathers. You go and read it in there. There's no more mashing together, an attempt to mash together the hypostases and the essence. It's done, and that's what people followed. So on that's a similar issue of authoritative abandonment that you find. So we're discussing it, we're examining it, but it's not nuanced, it's established.
Right.
So you do see over a period of time, and it's not incorrect to say this from the pagan traditions, everything goes through a process of birth, stasis, degeneration, destruction. Societies go through that.
Yeah, everything's secular in their worldview. So
everything. A cell goes through cellular mitosis just like that. And that's why why I disagree with Parmenides and Aristotle so much. How can there be an everlasting existence when you see with your own eyes yourself dying? Well, that's an eternal thing. Then they have to nuance everything.
Right.
And so that's why in Buddhism and Western religions, especially Orthodox, there is a microcosm, macrocosm similarity in the created worlds, but not in comparison to the operations of the divine person. That's why we have this is what woke me up, is the uncreated energies. And when you have the uncreated energies that are also divine, then you don't have to try to say, well, Christ is fully in the Eucharist. Okay. Well, then it's substantial also. Well, the substantial means created. Is he fully in there or not? And so you go down this rabbit hole trying to redefine things that are already defined.
Right.
So to me, that's the same thing with plundering the church, plundering any traditional, religion or any tradition. So yeah, I definitely see that breaking down. Is that a natural course of action? Is that a nature of man to do that, or are they influenced from other realms? Buddhism says you're influenced from the demonic realm, and they don't have truth. So wouldn't that also be the case since we have truth?
Right. No.
So I don't discount everything that other people and other religions have on certain things, because they obviously are descendants of Adam as well. So they obviously had some idea of, at one time, of a first cause being, and along the way they lost the patristic teaching, right. And then they made stuff up and filled in the blanks, and that's where they got ruined.
And the Orthodox concept of logos spermaticos, which we get from St. Justin Martyr, allows us to approach these different world religions from the kind of perspective you're outlining, in terms of there's not, we don't just say everything about a particular worldview is totally incorrect, because if everything was incorrect, it probably wouldn't exist. The fact that it exists, there's going to be bits and pieces of truth within there. I myself, on my own journey, have found, the most abundance of what I perceive to be true in orthodoxy, using these sort of laws of logic as bumpers, as guides to try to figure out what is going on in these sort of spiritual worldviews, these mythologies, these structures, and things like the hypostatization, energy essence, logos logoi, the anthropology of the nous. All these things then start to come together from that perspective.
Sure.
So,
this seems to come up quite a bit. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, sorry. It just, from my end, it looked like it was a little bit jittery.
Could be.
Oh, I was just going to say, not to get off the line of thought, but this comment here from IHASA7, lacking metaphysical mechanics are not lacking in it. It's just the premises that are screwed. Again, what I began with my statement was all concepts, philosophies, and religions start with your hypostases beginning as an accident. And you are complete as a hypostatic being within the primordial virtue. Your accidental fall into the human realm is a temporary situation. So it doesn't matter if their explanations of what virtue is or what they think metaphysical realms can be described as. No matter how nuanced you get, the belief is that you are an accident coming into existence. You're temporarily a human. You're going to go back, whether you like it or not, back to the ether again, or the Tao, and then at the end of the cosmic cycle, you will be wiped out, and so you won't exist eventually.
Right.
That is not the act of a compassionate first cause being. So therefore, in the patristic teaching that became and evolved after divine revelation, Christ came, then you will exist either in separated in privation or in the eschaton in paradise. You will be a person that doesn't lose instantiation and sentience and individuality in eternity. Mm-hmm. So that's quite a bit different than really everything else. I mean, right. The only way that you can overcome the accidental thing is, well, you just don't want to think of yourself coming into existence as an accidental. So the only argument you can present is, unless you were. But then you have to answer all the questions regarding the divine revelation, Christ's presence, the realities of our histories. Then you start getting into platitudes of the illusory realm and solipsism and whether or not the past actually existed and did he actually come. Do you trust history? Do you trust the people that witnessed? So that's a total different subject.
Right.
And this is what I find in my experience so far in the 3 years I've been circling the wagons closer and closer and closer to the fire at the center, which is orthodoxy, and practicing it, is there are some people that have lost the original teachings because they've made it worth less. That's also a form of commodification because they don't treat it with value. One treats it with value to try to plunder it and make money off it. The other one thinks it's completely worthless, and they just either change all of it or abandon it.
Right. Agreed. So on it as a worldview, as a phenomenon, as again, a commodity in the West here. So yoga, as we've already mentioned, means yoke. And there are 3 main schools of yoga. You guys have probably heard of them. That's the jhana yoga. And yoga isn't always what you think of in terms of these physical prostrations and positions and stuff like that. There's what's called jhana yoga, and it's one of the 3 main, and it's actually an emphasis on knowledge. That knowledge is a way to moksha, a way to releasement from the cycle of samsara. That's what these yoga practices are. So there's tons and tons of schools of quote unquote yoga, but the point of it is to be released from the cycle of reincarnation. And so one way you can do that, according to these traditions, is through knowledge and probing of questions. Who am I? What am I? What is my purpose? So that's called jhana yoga. And the other school, another school, and I'm not putting these in any particular way here, but is karma yoga. So that's probably the most common form of yoga most people understand. And that's all about right action. So it's tied to dharma, concepts of the dharma, one's purpose, what's right action. And that right action is really a form of prayer in and of itself. And so it's more focused on one's dharma. And this is at a theoretical level here is what we're talking about. And then there's bhakti yoga. And bhakti, if you guys aren't familiar, is just a Sanskrit term in regards to devotion. So bhakti yoga, another method to releasement of the cycle of reincarnation, one through knowledge, one through doing what's right, and then another one through bhakti, which is devotion. So you can be released through the cycle of reincarnation through bhakti, through whatever your personal deity. So there's all these different schools, Vajrayana, Vaishnavas, the Shaivas, and they worship different deities. And then you have particular bhakti, devotion to those deities. And that's another way of releasement. Well, then there's other forms of yoga like Raja Yoga, and that's the yoga from the sutras of Patanjali. And it's much more, and this is where I was talking about, most of the people who are doing yoga have no idea how comprehensive these things are in regards to Raja Yoga. It has its own epistemology, its own metaphysics, its own ethics, its own system, and then it has the what we would consider traditional yoga here in the West, these sort of systematized forms of physical exercise, physical positions. And then there's tantric yoga. Tantric yoga is going to be tied to obviously the more left-handed paths and Hindu spirituality, and it's more about attainment of visualization. They use mandalas and stuff like that in a sort of magical way, if you will. They have transgressive rituals, so doing things again because it's left-handed that you traditionally wouldn't do, or you'd find maybe gross or something like that. And then of course the sexual techniques, so things like the Kama Sutras, all these different sexual positions, that itself is also a form of yoga.
Sure, yeah.
And then you have Hatha yoga, and that is really what people practice here in the West. And Hatha yoga is all about the sort of physical strength of performing these things. And so Hatha yoga is about physical and mental strength. And you do this through the postures. So by mastering the various postures, you can become physically strong and mentally strong. And that's essential to be that mental strength and physical strength is essential for the discipline to be an ascetic, which then the asceticism allows you to be released from the cycle of reincarnation. And then the last one that I wanted to highlight was the Kundalini yoga, which is a little bit of a different emphasis than all the other ones because it's about the activization of one's sort of dormant chi energy, the energy at the base of the spine, and this serpentile force that goes up the spine and activates the third eye. And then so through the activation of the third eye, the eye of Shiva, if you will, then you can attain sort of supernatural powers. So the very different emphasis on the Kundalini yoga than maybe the Jhana yoga, which is more of almost a philosophical, sort of erudite approach to releasement. And so those are different forms of yoga. And so what we get here in the West is really just a form of hatha yoga, an emphasis on the physical, emphasis on the physical and the mental. And then it really is then divorced from the whole spiritual worldview context that it comes from, and is just a physical exercise. It's like going to the gym. It's divorced from all the things that you were just talking about in regards to larger metaphysics, presuppositions, understandings of anthropology. Most people have no idea about that stuff. And so,
sure.
And so before I go into the purchasing of yoga and a little interesting connection I wanted to make between yoga pants, is there anything you want to add to that?
To the yoga pants?
No. Well, I was going to say something here in a second, but just in regards to the schools of yoga and the sort of misunderstandings a lot of people have. Most people aren't even aware of the diversity of what yoga is.
Yeah, 100%, yeah.
Because it's all about being released from moksha. Moksha, a Sanskrit term just for releasement from the cycle of reincarnation, which that cycle is then called samsara. So didn't know if you wanted to say anything particular about these schools of yoga or how Westerners understand that before getting into then the actual commodified forms they occupy in the West.
Sure, yeah. You want me to try to do the video again, or you think it's better not to do it?
Yeah, go ahead and try. It shows excellent connection on my end, so.
Okay, we'll try that out. For years, I tried to make it as a writer and screenwriting. Also, I've taken a stab at a few fictional pieces. And what you learn when you write, just like when you write the ending first. So if you write the ending first and you establish characters and you establish a thing that the main character wants, you already know the entire story. That's just filling in the blanks. It's not that overly simplified, but the point is that the end of the Dharma ending period, as predicted by Hindu schools and Buddhist schools, they have a Dharma ending period. The whole cycle will end eventually. So when you get to the gist of the issue, then you're looking at the issue of whether or not one can leave the three realms or the earthly realms before that, and how you will leave. Mm-hmm. It's already been established in the Eastern schools that only a Tathagata attainment status leaves. Now, the question has been debated whether or not one can take other sentient beings along with them in the end of age to their paradise. So if they can't go to their attainment status of returning through Tathagata. So if that's the end purpose of all reincarnation and all physical human existence, and it happens so rarely, they say, then to me at least, it is it's almost like a natural theology struggle with nature, Darwinism, climb to the top mentality. You got to get there before everything blows up, right? And nobody's going to really help you. Just have some bits and crumbs of information to help you along the way. Mm-hmm. So in the different schools, yeah, there are reasons why the whole yoga tradition of physical practice only, because everything has a corresponding existence in another dimension. Mm-hmm. Therefore, your true body, like Plato said, in another dimension is also moving when you move. So when you move, it moves. And when there are karmic substances that come up in the form of illness in this realm, it's because you in that body, in your real body, has a karmic problem that is materially existing, but made up of the spiritual substance. So if that's the case, can just physical practice by the installation of chi or energy mechanisms help in eliminating that alone? Over how many eons has that been accomplished or been attained, all those karmic substances? So in that corresponding body and bodies and other dimensions, physical practice can't solve that in other schools, they say. So there has to be a correction of the mind, like you're saying. Mm-hmm. So when acting and interacting and not accumulating more karma, then you have to know how to act in self-restraint. And so those are meant to, that's wisdom, precept samadhi wisdom. So wisdom guides you on how to not incur more karma and how to try to get to the next life. The goal in Brahmanism and Hinduistic tradition is that you don't leave the mortal coil. Even if you do become a Buddha, you will not become a Buddha unless you're in a Brahmin caste. You're in a priestly class or caste. You can't in the other castes, even if you're a king. So the goal is to be reincarnated and have the wish to be reincarnated as a priest. And then while in that life, you do much work for others' salvation as well. And eventually they think you're going to become a Buddha or a Tathagata. Mm-hmm. So to me, knowing the end helps one find out the philosophy of use of each school, whether or not it makes sense within the realm of Eastern paganism, whether or not it can, if it contradicts itself. Right. So, and again, the problem is how do you verify that? You can't verify it. It's all in the mind. So some of the traditions that say, what does it matter, the physical practice? What matters is the accumulation of knowledge. Right. And the accumulation of knowledge is stored in your real body in the other dimension. So in the next life, you can draw on that, and it's accumulated over a period of time. And like Rupert Sheldrake's idea of collective consciousness, since you're all made of divine essence, the same essence, then you can access all accumulated consciousness and knowledge from everybody else if you do certain things. So in general, what I found is that the different Hindu and yogic traditions say, well, they all lead to salvation eventually. Just choose one and then commit to it, because you can't practice two schools at the same time and serve two masters. Right. So, but then you'll never know if the other one makes more sense, because once you commit to one school, you can't leave. No other master will take you if you leave that one master. So it really does well on compartmentalizing people from gaining knowledge of anything else other than that one school.
Right. Right. No, that's an excellent point. And so what I wanted to say in regards to yoga pants is, again, a sort of another commodity. Women roll around with their yoga pants and their yoga mats, and that certainly signifies who they want to be perceived to be. But I also think that, and this was just a sort of off the top of the head observation that maybe is just interesting, was yoga pants, and me as a warm-blooded male have to do everything in one's willpower to sometimes not to look at various things. So I was interested in a possible connection between yoga pants, yoga, the commodification, and sex, generally speaking, and the sort of sex. Society in general is becoming more sexualized, and the lack of modesty, because yoga pants aren't Indian, right? You're not going to go to India and find a bunch of women doing yoga in yoga pants. It's this Western thing. It's a Western commodity, and how that. The sort of retrogression back to paganism, and how that is tied to then the lack of modesty, but more sexuality, if you will. I don't know. I thought there might be something there. I was curious. I just wanted to bounce that off of you, see what you thought.
Yeah, that is definitely a Western thing that's not allowed over there.
Right. Of course not.
Women, families in general, they have a very modest way about them. Well, the goal is to have a modest way about it. I don't like speaking broadly about any people or group. The goal is to have a modesty about them. The goal is to serve your family well as a father. The woman is to, it's a very patristic lifestyle. And I think it's funny because I have a lot of friends that when I was wandering around in the East that went to India, and it's nothing like what they thought. It was nothing like their yoga studio that they went to. In San Diego here on the coast near where I live in North County, San Diego, we have the highest concentration per square mile of yoga studios, I think, in the country. I don't know if it's outside of that as well, because obviously that would have to be taking into account other places like India. But
right.
Yeah, they go to India, then they find out there's difficulties just like here. There's social issues and problems just like here. There's poverty just like here.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a young guy in the 80s or 90s that went and practiced martial arts, and he goes to Japan and he thinks everybody's doing karate. And so the assumption is that everybody is doing yoga there, or everybody is practicing yoga, or they're practicing the precepts. People are people, man. And it's kind of disrespectful to presume that, to project that onto other people. And so I do think the projection of how it is. I mean, you go to a yoga practice there and you show up with skimpy clothes and no head cap, unless they're a modernist sect, unless they're modern and they're westernized and everything else.
Right, westernized, yeah. Exactly.
You got to cover. You can't go around showing skin and doing all kinds of other stuff, because they look at that as a temptation.
Right, and that's a distraction from the point of the yoga in the first place.
Yeah. The only sects that would permit that are usually, I mean, the entire Hindu tradition is an evolution of Brahmanism. So when we say tradition, it's actually in the past several hundred years. It's not traditional. It's actually new. Mm-hmm. Right? Even if it's 2,000 years, it's still not equivalent to how far back Brahmanism goes.
Right.
And so,
absolutely.
So when you have that similarity of Kama Sutra and the similarity with Tibetan Tantrism, Tantrism in China didn't take off when it went from India to China, because Chinese are very analytical.
Yes. And
when that hit the shores or the country of China, they look at it like, so you need a man and a woman because a woman is yin and a man is yang energy, and you need that for completion of cultivation to reach. The Tao school pre-existed the arrival of this particular school, so they're like, well, men and women not only have yin and yang in their body already, but even down to the smallest particles, they believe. Down to the smallest substance, everything possesses the yin-yang symbol, because everything in the world of forms that was created as an afterthought of the fall that we talked about in the last video possesses part of the primordial virtue and the fallen substance of karma. Everything. It exists everywhere. So where are you getting this yin and yang energy that's needed from a male and a woman? It's not permitted if you're a monk to let the senses control you in any form. So what are you talking about? So it was, the only way it survived was in Lamanism that we know of. Right. And that's what, and I mean, I don't think any traditional school treats Lamanism as legitimate Buddhism compared to Theravada. It's usually, I'm not making fun of people, but when you see that it never claimed to be Buddhist. It was only brought in under past several hundred years, just like in India, how different Brahmin traditions were conglomerized into a one-word Hinduism. The same thing that happened with Lamanism and Chen Buddhism and Theravada or whatever. And it made it even worse when China's, Communist Party, they wanted more solidification of all religious practices and control over it. And so everything is considered to be Chen. If it's not Chen, which originated in China, then it's not allowed, or it has to be governed by Chen. Right. So it's the same, to me, it's the same issue.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally agree. One of the other things I wanted to talk to you about was, in regards to the sort of commodification of the East, are these really elaborate and expensive spiritual retreats, right? We see people like Jack Dorsey, who wears his Buddhist prayer beads and claims to sit in meditation for hours. I'm not saying that he doesn't, but I think another dimension that's really interesting, again, that people are consuming these ideas and then putting them on in their personas, that these retreats are so darn expensive and they draw a particular group of people. And I feel like this is another form of the commodification of Eastern spirituality. And again, very much divorcing it from its original context. Because if you were in China, if you were in India, if you're in Japan, you don't pay somebody for wisdom.
Yeah.
You have to earn it. And
Yeah.
so the whole concept is just so Western. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Considering that, I mean, I can see it from both sides. If it's a do as thou will, then it's better than nothing if they're being told that.
For sure. For sure.
But again, if you truly believe in reincarnation and only those that reach at Tathagatahood, which is why Chen Buddhism kind of makes sense, well, then why try? Let's just do the best we can with what we have. And that's why their standard seems to go down further and further. Not all of them, not every sect of Chen or Zen Buddhism, but it's like there's a cultural Catholic and there's cradle and cultural Orthodox. I see the same thing also, of course, in those, well, more so with the Westernization. The West tends to want to take anything from overseas and then bastardize it into an ecumenical status, so we don't offend our neighbors. Anybody can do it. I don't care where it comes from. I care whether or not it's true.
Exactly.
And whether or not it's contradictory. And if you're telling me to commit all this effort to this physical practice and all this meditation, and the only thing I can hope for is another life, and maybe in like 1 billion kalpa, that's 1 billion times 16 billion, by the way, that somehow one day I might be able to reach the fruit status of Tathagatahood, which is Buddhahood, Buddhahood, and then go back to my origin and then be annihilated and lose all consciousness. Why not just stay here and do as thou will and be annihilated anyway?
I know.
That's the whole point. You go down these reasonings and you realize that's what you end up with. You're either going to be annihilated one way or another, so why do anything?
Right. No, absolutely. And I think, again, this all really in the end points roads back towards orthodoxy, back towards Christianity, because it doesn't fall into these same patterns that, again, we see over and over and over again in regards to cyclical worldviews, to like you're calling the annihilation of oneself. It just takes a while maybe to see it, in terms of you're just getting into religion or spirituality, or wherever you're at in your
vast.
Go ahead.
It's very vast.
Yeah. Because it seems like, given the traditionalism of the East compared to the modern and contemporary nature of the West, that there's something there that must be much truer. Even though from a more presuppositional paradigmatic level, we see, it's the same patterns of the fallen world. It all takes you to the same place.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I kind of look at it like, I grew up Jehovah's Witness, so I didn't know what real Christianity was. I had an image and an idea of the Father and an idea of Christ, but it's kind of like looking at a Lamborghini, but covered in mud. And then you look at shiny, brand new, fully detailed, Honda Accord. And you're like, I would much rather have that shiny car over there, because you don't know what's underneath the mud.
Right.
And when people are constantly assuming that the surface layer, as you've been presented, that's what Christianity is, according to, well, the other traditions that aren't Orthodox, or at least trad Catholic, you have no idea what the real Christianity is. It's not explained to you properly. It's not explained how it is distinct from Protestantism, how the different sects of Protestantism are distinct from Arianism to Trinitarian, Calvinist, and you have to slow down. And most people don't have time. They're too busy chasing, that money.
Right. Mammon.
You got to feed the family.
Right.
And you got to pay the bills on that boat you never drive and that RV. And, those $10 Starbucks, you're making them rich so they can build more institutions to oppress you because they hate you.
Right.
So that's kind of like my thing, is that, there needs to be more.
I mean, literally the siren, the symbol of the Starbucks, like the Starbucks logo is what's called a siren. These are it comes from Greek mythology, or really sailors around. There's kind of different forms of it throughout world mythology, but there's these mermaid-like figures, these women that would lure you to them. They would sing these beautiful songs, and sailors would start sailing their ships towards these beautiful women. And then once they got there, they found out that they were essentially demons. They were evil, and they consumed them. They robbed the men. They killed them. They took their goods. And that is the symbol of Starbucks?
Yeah. Yeah, well, we thought it was pretty, so yeah. Yeah, a coral snake is pretty. Wait till it bites you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do see, like what you're saying, to dress something up and make it more presentable. Like you see all these people that are presenting whatever it is, witchcraft or other forms of neo-paganism.
Oh, yeah.
Abramovich and all these other people that just say it's just a gag. It's just to trigger people. It's just to create images.
Yeah, like her cooking. I won't say the full phrase because I know that gets triggered by the AI. But the cooking of food that resembles human anatomy and full human figures.
It doesn't matter if you're saying that it's not real and it's just a gag. The point is that you're trivializing something that makes people trivialize everything.
Right.
And that is what we're facing in Western civilization in general. You could see the same problem. I'll share this with. Sorry, are you talking? I can't see.
No, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. No, I think I have a lag. I'm looking on my phone at the comments, but then I have a lag in the video. So Mia just shared a funny thing with me. She just saw a video on YouTube about Japan and how they also have a loss of identity, a lot of the younger people. And so a lot of these younger people throughout, especially Tokyo, they start these little social clubs where they reenact different cultures. I mean, completely down to the T. They'll go to like a diner where it's like the 1950s, and the girls dress up in poodle skirts, right?
Oh.
And the guys drive up in the old, collectible 57 Chevy or something like that. Yeah. And there's others that do the 40s dancing and swing dancing, and there's others that do other types. One that she just saw was one where, and I love all my Mexican brothers, so they had this one. It was just nothing but a Mexican club. So they had like the hydraulic bouncing cars. They had the guys and the girls where they dressed up like Cholo gangsters, where they had total sleeve tattoo. They don't even know what it means. They have sleeve gangster tattoos, even on their neck and face. These beautiful girls otherwise. They like totally, and they wear black lipstick and all this stuff.
Are these real tattoos?
Yeah, real tattoos. Real tattoos.
I was thinking maybe like the sleeves you can purchase or something for.
Yeah. I know, that's what I would think too. So this is what happens. Like I said, when you start trivializing, even if something is bad, forget about trivializing things that are good and righteous.
Mm-hmm.
If you trivialize everything, then you don't value anything. Everything is the same.
Yes.
It's all garbage.
Yes, and which is tied to the loss of meaning. Right.
Yeah,
so interestingly, talking about Japan, I mean, look at the suicide rates.
Yeah.
It's Japan and Switzerland, I believe, are 1 and 2 continuously in the highest rates of suicide.
Yeah. South Korea too.
Yeah.
It's not very widely known because they have a good control on their media regarding it. But yeah, it's pretty bad.
Right. And so when you're talking about the sort of trivialization of, well, society or just tradition, it's a loss of meaning to a degree. And so again, I think I see a feedback loop, and then in terms of the reattainment of meaning in a trivialized context, in the terms of prayer beads, right?
Yep.
Prayer beads, spiritual apparel, T-shirts with deities on them, or the way you do your hair, or dreadlocks or something like that. Not that you can't have dreadlocks, but usually that entails a much larger concept or perception one person is trying to place themselves in. And I think all that we see that in a response to the trivialization, as you're talking about, to the absence of meaning. And so no wonder then we see that predominantly in the West, and then in societies like a Korea or a Japan, which are basically still ethnically, linguistically, historically the same countries, but totally wrapped up in the same consumeristic framework that we're kind of talking about in the West. I mean, Japan, Korea, very much the same way.
Yeah, they definitely have a super low crime rate. I mean, when I walk through the streets of Seoul and Busan and Tokyo.
And Tokyo is incredibly clean. Like, I've been in Japan, and that was the first thing I noticed compared to China was how much cleaner Japan was than China.
Yeah. Yeah, so they still have the remnants of their culture that hasn't been smashed by the smashing machine, which is communism. But traditionally, China was like that too.
Right.
And Vietnam and other cultures and stuff. But I mean, my point is that even though they lost the true acting out in essence of their own culture, there are
at least in regards to immigration. I know Japan's pretty good on that. Same with Korea. In terms, because when you talk about crime rates, I can't help but think that certainly plays a major factor. From having studied sociology, every sociological study shows that ways in which you fracture countries is to create or add more and more languages. So whenever this is common throughout history. You take a country, you start infusing people with a different language. Pretty soon, there's enough people. There's a tipping point, and the country breaks up because language is such a important glue, a societal glue.
Communication and clarity in communication too. That's why Greece and Rome did so well, even under paganism, because they had a unified language, a couple at least.
Right.
Yeah, going to the whole theme of the commodification, I think it's important. In my opinion, now that we're on that subject of people can simply just say this culture doesn't really exist. And we know that triggers a lot of people. We don't need to get into that subject, but you can actually roll it back and go to the regress and saying, well, no modern culture actually originally existed. And if you take it from a Christian perspective, do not be loving anything in the world. Well, that means anything that would have originated from the world. But wouldn't that mean the church? No, the church and the patristic traditions and the teachings that are eternal and non-contradicting, they don't originate in the world, in the fallen world. They originate in the divine mind, and they manifest through the church, and your participation is at that church. And so when the church produces a book or a Bible or a patristic father teaching on a certain doctrine, and you take it home, you've also gotten it from the church.
Right.
So that is the communication device to the world. So my point is that in the modern era, when they trivialize Christianity, and that if I read my Bible, isn't that a church too? No, it's not church, bro. So when you whittle it down to a point where even the experience and the definitions of the church in general are changed, then it's no wonder that they can't tell the difference between the changing cultures that are only byproducts of the fallen world, whether they be Western or Eastern or wherever, and the eternal truths. And the eternal truths were revealed directly. They weren't assumed like Sakyamuni or Hindu aesthetics. You didn't assume that. Now, this is my kind of worldview. Everybody says, well, because I used to say this. I used to say that, well, why is it that I forget which Greek gods it were. All the Greek gods were born at one time, and eventually they also say they're going to die. But there were some that said that Apollo was birthed from a virgin mother, and well, that's just I used to make an excuse that was just a precursor to Mary. So Christians stole that from Mary, but people don't understand that if Adam is if Adam is real, and they walk out of the garden, and here they go into time and space as we know it, and say, here's where Christ came, and here's all the patristic traditions. If Adam and Eve gave birth to all branches of people from their sons and daughters, and the patristic tradition stayed true up until Jesus' time, and then it continued on as a church, then they all, from a point of origin, know of a God, and then changed it later into all these pagan branches. So to say that you can apathetically from nothingness, as Aquinas says over here, and Aristotle over here, reason back to a first cause without any knowledge of this, well, the well's already been poisoned from person one. So how can you remove God from your consciousness in an invisible being? You can't.
Right.
It's there. Now, you could be born in the middle of nowhere and you think there's divinities and demons and spirit creatures living in animals, but that also may have had a patristic teaching. So my point is that along over here, somewhere parallel to the patristic fathers right here, you have, like, say this is Greece. So of course Greece probably had some idea of a god or god. Even if it was a demon god, that still stemmed from Adam.
Right.
I mean, it's so simple, it seems like to me. So to have an influence of a virgin giving birth to a Messiah here, that was prophesied in the garden. So any interaction with the patristic fathers are going to influence everybody else at some time. So I agree. I've heard this, ironically, I heard it from Jay say one time. He has an idea that the Greek philosophers were influenced by either ancient Israel or they had a tradition of knowingness
right.
of that. And we know that's the case because Nebuchadnezzar converted Babylon after Daniel interpreted his dreams. And then hundreds of years later, by the time the Magi came to see and they knew to look for the Messiah because he met the signs, they weren't Jewish anymore. They reincorporated their pagan traditions back into it again.
Right.
So there's this point where we get truth and then we screw it up. So again, the commodification in the West of Eastern traditions is, I mean, they did that to their own religion too.
Right.
But we also did it further. And so if your starting point is not on logic, on non-contradiction,
right.
on the divine mind, on searching for what is eternal, you're looking for things that oftentimes are self-focused. I want to save myself. I want to be melded into the monad by going into nothingness, so I have to think nothingness and meditation. And it's all about the self. It is not
right.
concerning any honor to a divine being. It's melding back into the divine essence. So you don't have to experience difficulties and struggles anymore.
And
a real tradition is going to say, no, you have to face struggle.
Yes.
And that's it. And be tough.
Which I think, for me, everything you're just talking about there ties into the video I just did on the ego. And that takes an ego, right? To have a sense of self, that you're going to conquer something and persevere and move through something. This is sort of an egoic structure that is encountering the world and trying to move through and become. It's a sort of a becoming process. But once you do away with that, and this sort of self-annihilation, what we're talking about in these Eastern mystical traditions, the ironic thing, the sort of paradox is when you dissolve the ego, it becomes a worship of oneself and creation, right? Yeah. Because oneself then is the pinnacle of creation. Mm-hmm. And I think this is so counterintuitive for most people when they think of these traditions of the sort of dissolution of ego and thinking about a global understanding and the global village. Oh, well, this is an expansion of understanding. This is a much more comprehensive perception of where we're at in the world. And therefore, this person must be, they must not have an ego. And by diminishing their ego, somehow they are more selfless, when really it's the opposite. It's
Yep.
the exact opposite. It's by being an individual, knowing I'm an individual, taking responsibility for my individuality, and then encountering others as individuals, as egoic structures.
Yeah.
That's how you work and move through the world, which is the total opposite of what we see in sort of progressivism and sort of anything that's sort of utopian, collectivistic framework. It's going to be the opposite.
Exactly it. What you just said is exactly it. It summates what is wrong with it and why the Western far left, or let's just say most Western people, actually, they like it as a philosophical concept, if not for a religion. They like it because it does talk about a elimination of borders, elimination of cultures, elimination of backwards religions, of race, of all those things. Anything that was before needs to be done away with, since it's all not materially real but formally real. So therefore, if we just have one big, taken from what you're talking about, one big world, everybody will get along because you're suppressing your selfish pursuit. Well, how are you going to enforce that in people that don't want that? Just like arguing with a libertarian. Well, I used to be a libertarian, so don't jump down my throat. Well, then you have to force people to accept it.
Exactly.
So where are you not violating your own principle?
Exactly. Which is the fundamental characteristic of the fallen world. You see, because it's anti-logic. Because logic is an energy of the logos that allows us to get back to God.
Yeah. And I think that, like you're saying, I think that kind of goes back to maybe, and I haven't studied enough, so maybe church fathers have already talked about it, but the promise that you're going to become like God, well, the only way you can become like God, which is impossible, is to become a new hypostatic addition to his person, and that would be through also being made of his essence. So maybe the promise was you will consume the essence by consuming the tree of knowledge, therefore connecting knowledge with divinity. And that's the false lie.
Right.
Knowledge doesn't lead to divinity.
Right.
Only grace, and grace can only be given because of obedience. And that's
exactly. And so the obedience is the obedience to God's will, which is the only way in which one can eventually become deified. So it's an ego structure. It's a person choosing to align one's individual will with the will of God. Outside of that, there is no divinization. There is no theosis. There is no, the whole it doesn't exist. The only way to do it is to align oneself with the will of God, which is, of course, a lifetime pursuit. I'm no expert at doing that. I'm still trying to conquer my own sins. So,
well, the response would be, well, then how is that different than being subservient to a supreme being, where we are saying, let's let go of ego to be melted into the, monad or all mankind or whatever. Well, the difference is that you retain your personhood and your individual free will, and you don't lose self. You want to give up everything. And that is whether it is literal or you're an atheist that practices Buddhism and you want to take the philosophical concepts. You have to force others to do the same thing in order for it to work.
Right.
And that's totally different. I may be worshiping a supreme being, a first cause, that is a he, but he also, because of me following a way of life, I have a better quality of life. And then in the long run, just like they have a long run, they have a long goal out of their whole religious tradition, belief. I retain me. I don't get melted and thrown into a giant blob later on.
Right.
So that's totally different. And that is the issue of the Western mind that believes in property. You retain your propertyness, your proprietariness of yourself, and you don't have that self-actualization. There's the yoga temple here, one of the biggest in the country here in San Diego, North County. Self-actualization leads to the losing of self. So they shouldn't call it the Self-Actualization Center or the Self-Realization Center. They should have it called the losing of self, whatever. I mean, come up with something funnier, but Yeah, that's the irony is it's like you said, it's anti-logic. It's the opposite of what they're saying.
Right. Right. Well, last thing that I had for our discussion, and I think we have a super chat we can take here in a moment. And if anybody else has any questions they'd like to ask Justin or myself, or ideas they'd like us to comment on, feel free to send some questions in. Always greatly appreciated. But the last thing that I wanted to highlight in terms of a sort of commodification of the East are tattoos. And people getting tattoos of Mandarin Chinese or Om symbols or things like that, and sort of writing them on their body, which you go to China, they don't get English words tattooed in the same way that Western people get Chinese words tattooed on themselves. Now, if anybody's been in Asia, you know that people wear words with English on them who can't read English, and they don't even make any sense, or they're just laced with profanity and they have no idea. So I just wanted to highlight, martial arts. I think that's another. We kind of really covered that in our last video, but I think for some people that can be a sort of commodified thing people purchase in regards to a sort of spiritual. I know you and I, we both got into it wholeheartedly in regards to learning martial arts, but it did become a sort of spiritual practice and all this stuff, which we reject now. But it seems like that's another form of commodity. Buddha heads, you can't go to a New Age spiritual store without seeing Buddha heads and Hindu figurines all over the place, which is, in my mind, again, another form of commodification. And so that was really the last thing I wanted to say in regards to the ways in which we commodify Eastern traditions. I think we've hit a multitude of different examples, but the end point, I think, is interesting as a lot of people who have become Orthodox that are watching this video, you and I, how telling somebody you're Christian or Orthodox has we'll just say Christian in general, has a totally different feel than if you told somebody you're of some East Asian tradition or you practice these things. Because somehow if you say you practice some East Asian tradition, you're exotic, you're enlightened, you're cultured, you're smart, you're probably successful. It comes with all these different associations with the fact that you do this or that. And so curious maybe on what your thoughts are regarding this sort of the response you get from people when you tell them, oh, actually I'm Christian now. For me, I know this has been a bit of a shocker for a lot of people that I was friends with, or I am friends with, and been friends with, and they know my whole journey through the psychedelics, through magic, East Asia, and then you come out on the other end and feel like you've exhausted all the options, and you say, actually, I think Eastern Orthodox Christianity is true, and I'm going to try to change my lifestyle in a way that actually isn't very easy, because I think it's true, and people can't really, they can't really comprehend that. Whereas you say that, oh, actually, I'm a Zen Buddhist. Oh, wow. Oh, okay. I heard about that before. That's pretty interesting, or something like that.
A person can say that they are a thing, or their idea can produce a result all they want. But all you have to do is go somewhere where it's been enacted. So what I said earlier about traveling to India, when you have an idea how things are, you travel to Japan, or you travel to Europe even. Or like a lot of people become Orthodox, they go to the old countries and they find out they have a lot of the same problems and struggle with some of the similar things that you wouldn't imagine. Let me just put it that way without going into it. And then you come back here and you have a familiarity again. The wake up call is that it's when these cultures and these religions have a way of playing out into their fullness, and then you see the result of it on a societal level. Right. That should give you an indicator that came from a worldview, a philosophy, and or a religion, which drives the politic.
Right.
And when you have a society that is a byproduct of that, I'm just trying to be kind about it, because everybody's in the fallen world, and some of these people are being, in different countries throughout the world, being ruled over by regimes, and it's not to their fault completely. But the point is that you see the result of a way of doing that.
Right.
That's why you don't see the same result everywhere, like the Western civilization and the Western technology and the Western everything else. That comes from an ordered society. It's not from the race. It's from the church.
Well, even the presuppositions of, and I didn't mean to cut you off, I apologize, but when you were talking about the sort of orderedness, because you're talking about more of the fruits of, let's say, Christendom, historically speaking, not maybe right now. I think that's also tied to the presupposition of logos itself, that language accurately describes reality. Again, tied to our understanding that God spoke the world into existence, and therefore, we can actually measure and take averages of things in the world to know more about the world.
Yeah.
It's very subtle, but I think a lot of this is all embedded within the Christian worldview, and that's why it's also despised so much.
Yeah. I think it could be also because postnatally they've been told that no matter what the outcome is, because the methods were mean, that allegedly, that however the byproduct of Western civilization is, it's inherently then evil.
Right.
Then you examine other cultures, and since all mankind is in a fallen state, you find out all the other cultures also have used certain forms of illicit means to get to where they are too, and then you realize it's a false claim.
Right.
And so more and more Western men especially are realizing that when they don't just take the knowledge in the books from the universities are taught, they take on true scholasticism, which is that the case? Is the West the only place that's produced suffering and evil and problems?
Right.
No. Well, then if both have done that, then what other things, what other countries and what other cultures and what is a byproduct of those things?
Right.
So when you do a comparative analysis and you realize, well, our civilization's not that bad, actually. It's had problems just like everybody else. It does great things like everybody else, but you don't take any honor and glory for yourself, because the order that came in Western and Middle Eastern societies came because of the church.
Yeah.
Because that kind of order and that kind of dedication to building the first university in Constantinople and the seminaries and other universities throughout the Western world came from order, and the order came from the church.
Right.
And they were freed by having that order. So freedom comes from order. Order is directed by the divine mind through the church. And to see that, but to abandon it because everything's trivialized, because people made mistakes along the way, and that summates everything. Well, do you also do that to other people in other cultures? And the question is, they don't. And then you say, why? And they haven't thought about that. And so blaming everything on the West is actually blaming everything on Christianity and the church. And when they realize they don't know what Christianity and the church is,
right,
then when they discover that, like you're saying, you run into Orthodox, or at least if you run into trad Catholicism and you hear what it's supposed to be presented as, and then they reject the current status of Rome, whether or not their theology is correct, they at least practice the virtues. And then you realize, wow, I've been lied to on this level, on this level, on this level. So why would you listen to that source of information anymore for any form of knowledge?
Yep.
Go get your own knowledge.
Yep.
Go get your own education. And so that's where it leads to. It leads to a rediscovery of truth. So it doesn't lie in the West. It doesn't lie in the Middle East. It doesn't lie in Israel. It doesn't lie in the patristic fathers. It doesn't lie in Adam. It lies in God.
Yeah. And that journey that you're talking about is really a discovery of oneself as well, in an authentic sense, and the term of you going and learning for yourself and becoming an individual that actually has unique opinions and a unique worldview, and not just a consumer of the things that are given to you, which is, I think, again, I know kind of beating a dead horse, but the byproduct of the annihilation, as we're talking about, of the ego or the self or anything like that, when what we're talking about, the way out, is for you to start to question things and actually develop a sense of self that's unique and an understanding that's unique. and realizing even things like the Byzantine Empire were not a utopia. Like there
was,
and you'll never get that. So to when you're talking about like the sort of pain and suffering or the aberrant things that have happened historically, and you try to say, oh, that's a Western thing. Well, even in the Byzantine, no matter what, we're in a dualistic fallen world.
Yeah.
Therefore, you're always going to have both. You cannot have the totality of any one thing in this existence. And so any form of utopia that isn't at the end of the world or the coming of Christ, it's all a lie, because you can't do that. We're literally in duality. There's an up and down. There's a color spectrum. There's left and right. There's direction. It can't happen.
Yeah, I think it's funny, if you grow up in a Protestant tradition, they speak of, but don't actually oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes read what the Old Testament stories are, and these saintly and holy figures. Oftentimes they'll hear about the problems that David went through and the things that his family did, but they don't really get into the details. I noticed, not all of them, but a lot of the time, at least in my personal experience. So when you go to all the other, I mean, Adam and Eve walk out of the garden, and they have their 2 kids, and their firstborn kills the other one. And then from that on, it's just constant war.
Right.
What do? Just say all humans are evil, therefore humans need to be done away with? That's exactly what the modernists are saying.
Exactly.
That's their logical conclusion, because they aren't able to separate and distinguish between good and bad, or that a person that commits bad can repent, or a person that commits bad also commits good things, and it's up to God in the end. But you need to help each other, not give up on each other. That is such a better communal experience of brotherhood and patriarchal tradition. You have fathers, you have priests, you have others looking out for you. That's a network of people, dude.
Right.
So there's no reason to feel alone unless you've abandoned that entire thing.
Oh, then that male network, we don't have that anymore. And that would be, in my mind, a sort of rites of initiation. So because just like biologically speaking, male is so much different from the female, right? We all are female embryos. The XY is dropping that sort of last leg of the XX, and we become, so biologically it's a unique structure. Well, then you have to get away from the mother. You can't be rooted when you grow up. You're with your mom, you're breastfeeding. Well, the little girl can stay with her mom. She doesn't have to leave. She doesn't have to go through some initiation experience, because the life that she's going to become is already right there in the house, or at least the role model. For a boy, you have to go be with men, and therefore we have to have these men's groups. We have to have these men's clubs, these areas where young men can interact with older men and then actually experience difficulty, right? I mean, you don't have to go, bare ass naked in the woods for a week. Yeah. There's other ways you can be initiated, but certainly our culture has totally lost that in the 20th century. And
I think that's why guys like you and me went into the whole martial arts thing.
Exactly. We had to be baptized some way or another in terms of manhood.
Totally. Yeah, there's nothing like grappling, wrestling, tapping out, punching each other, getting kicked in the face and a bloody nose, and then you shake hands with the guy afterward. You have to learn how to not take it personal.
Yep.
And then you build each other up, so you learn how to not get hit again. And it's until you're there, you don't really get it. You don't really get it.
Right.
And it's the same thing if you went into firearms training, or like you're saying, survival training or whatever. So that's a good idea, actually.
Yeah, I mean, look what they've done to the Boy Scouts. I mean, you could say that was at least a form, although I was never a Boy Scout and I've heard various stories, but at least there was something there that provided young boys with real life skills and divorced from women.
Yes.
And now they won't allow that to happen with the transgenderism stuff and all. So it's just, it's very obvious, and it just takes people, men, boys, young guys, recognizing this and then committing ourselves to changing that in terms of our lifestyle, our children, and the way we're going to move forward in history. And therefore we change history, and we can change it the way that we want it. And so we have a way more power. It's just we have to get more people with a similar perspective, seeing things from the same angle.
And I think that can happen if we become, as more and more people are coming to Orthodoxy and trad Catholicism that rejects, Vatican II and all these other problems and stuff.
Right.
I think it's important to realize you can't bring in your own version of Christianity into Christianity. You got to leave your baggage at the door. I've already heard people that are converted for many years having conversations in private with them saying, well, the church doesn't say you can't have reincarnation. And that's just one subject.
That's 60%, 50 to 60% of Catholicism has reincarnational ideas. That was from a sociological book I read about 2 years ago, and it was talking about most of like Latin America and South American forms of Catholicism. They're totally on board with reincarnation.
Yeah. So they don't understand the implications of it, how it nullifies the church.
Exactly.
And the entire point of Christ dying on Golgotha.
And same thing with liberation theology, which is so prominent in those parts.
Yeah,
which is it's just theological communism.
Yeah. So that's my point, is that not only can you think it through logically and prove that it's not compatible, you can also read it with your own two eyes, and the councils, how they reject that there was death before the fall, therefore nullifying. And then there's a pre-existing protoplast and the reincarnation and originism and whatever. Everything is there. But for whatever reason, people will rather read things about from, John Paul and I don't want to be whatever. They read whatever. They read whatever other than what the actual church teaches.
Right.
So I don't care what the modern church teaches. I care what the church has always taught.
Right. Agreed.
And then to me, that's a guiding post. So, well, what happens if somebody says something the opposite? Well, if it's not that big of a deal, well, let them think that. But if they start espousing that, then they themselves are changing it. Just change parish. Go to a different jurisdiction, whatever.
Right.
Don't let that stop you, is my point. I'm not going to let it stop me. I've already ran into stumbling blocks. I'm not going to let it stop me. We're all making mistakes. Priests and clergy are also making mistakes. They're also students of Christ. So, I've had to learn that lesson to not be so difficult on people, because I tend to do that on myself.
Right. Well, I was going to read this one super chat we got from Ortho Bro Nick. He's always with us in the streams. He actually has an INSO as his thumbnail or his pick or whatever, which is the incomplete circle there, and comes from Zen Buddhism. But anyways, he asks us, what do you guys think about Eckhart Tolle and the commodification of religious truths from Christianity and perhaps Buddhism? I would go ahead.
I don't know his work.
Oh, you don't know who Eckhart Tolle is?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, he basically looks like a squirmy little gamma male from Britain, and he's just all about promoting these ideas of enlightenment. He's a perennialist. He's basically a Deepak Chopra. I mean, they have the same worldview, like an Eckhart Tolle or Deepak Chopra. And so it's all about one's enlightenment. It's mixed with like Christian forgiveness and a sort of social justice warrior framework, of course. So divorced of any objective structure of morality that you'd actually have to deviate from, but just like this Christian forgiveness, Buddhist enlightenment, sort of Satori, detaching from the world, promotes the ideas of like the secret, that you can think about things and by visualizing them, you can eventually attain them, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So in regards to Nick's question, I absolutely would say that's a form of commodification of religious truths, and that's why Eckhart Tolle is so popular in the Western world, is because he's a perennialist. He's grabbing from all the different worldviews, which right from my mind, right there is a form of consumerism. Because if anybody dealing in philosophy or theology sophisticatedly knows, well, you can't just haphazardly pull from all these different worldviews, because then you're going to divorce all these things you're pulling from their actual context, and whatever you have is nothing resembling whatever it is that you were taking from. And so it's right there's an epistemological contradiction in perennialism. You cannot just grab things from all these different worldviews.
Yep.
Yet you can in consumerism, because that's how you consume things, just like when you go to a smorgasbord or a buffet. And so that's why he's so popular in the Western world. We see the consumerism in the way of his perennialism. And then the emotional, it's all about the way you feel, right? So he does not promote anything that's going to make people offended, let's say, like in a real sense that would make them want to change their lifestyles or condemn lifestyles that already exist in a particular way. So Eckhart Tolle, he totally represents what the women who are buying the yoga mats and the yoga pants and going to the yoga studio, he represents what it is they think they're leading towards in terms of a better understanding of the world and religion and spirituality. And inside of it, what's so interesting that, I'm not big on talking about racism or anything like that, but the people who are of this ilk, of this worldview, I think it is interesting how they perceive themselves to be sort of cultural saviors of the cultures that they're appropriating from, which leads, really, they have more of a negative, a diminished perspective of these other people than the people who are traditionally considered to be racist or whatever,
Yep.
And so I think that's it's subtle, but I think it's definitely there that the people who are always appropriating from all the different world religions are way more likely to be guilty of the things that they're accusing everybody else in regards to cultural appropriation, racism, bigotry in different sorts. So
I would say on that subject, I think it's interesting. Just wanted to add this before wrapping up that the abandonment of, you have to know what you're abandoning before you abandon it, and then turn it into just simply a social philosophical experiment.
Right.
And so what you're abandoning is there's a statement within cultivation circles in the East. They say the gong depends, or cultivation depends on oneself, but the gong depends on the master. What is gong? Gong is the Chinese term for the transformed virtue that deifies you to become the arhat, the bodhisattva, or the tathagata. And when you have that Buddha body or God body, then when you go to your heavenly paradise, you can help and save others as well. That's what they believe. Right. I don't believe it. You believe it.
Right.
I mean, they believe that. So the point is that if cultivation depends on oneself and gong depends on the master, how does the master do that? How does he transform? Well, these qi or energy mechanisms I told you about. Mm-hmm. And they practice a system called guanding. And guanding is the hands-on and the blessing and the energy pouring. They literally think they have a connection, not just to their ancestors of lineage, but also they have a connection to the heavenly realms. Correct. And that they're actually pouring and transforming energy mechanisms on you. Right. It's not just Falun Gong teaches that. Right. So it doesn't matter if it's make-believe or not. Maybe they are. Maybe they're giving you demon possession. Maybe that's what's going on. I mean, because I've had things that I saw and felt and everything else. It was obviously something there. Was it only in my mind? Or can it be projected onto the material world? Because if it can, then something's going on. Right. And if it doesn't actually save you, then it's not something from God. Right. So the point is that when you divorce the half of the entire practice, which is, I'm being a better person, but you're not anywhere near involved with an actual master that has a lineage back to the ancient world in their viewpoint, then you don't have any transformative energy. All you're doing is physical practice. And that's why I keep saying is that if you're just going to do physical practice and talk about being good, just go and lift weights or run. Right. You're just wasting your time. Well, then I'll do hot yoga. That's not yoga. Right. Because yoga or qigong or whatever you call it is an entire religion. It's a religion.
Yeah. It's way more than a fitness routine. So we have another question, actually one that I think is pretty interesting by Copper Spartan rather, is is visualization always wrong in the context of sports or academics, say? Because I was talking about the law of attraction and The Secret. And then we had two other individuals respond, say, if it's wrong in every other context, why wouldn't it be wrong for those things as well? And another person said, I thought visualization was wrong in the sense that demons can easily manipulate those without God's grace. And I am no expert on this area, so I actually cannot testify to what the church teaches on visualization. I know when I was saying that, I was actually not meaning sports or academics, because I actually visualize various things, like concepts and stuff. And when I play golf, I don't know about you, but I'm always trying to visualize what my next shot is and trying to enact that.
I don't think visualization is the problem. I think the mentality, the mentality is that, and I can tell you because some of my wife's friends that are Indonesian Chinese are Buddhist, and they go to Buddhist temple. Some have even gone to the biggest Buddhist temple in the world, which is Borobudur in Indonesia, and I think it's East Java. I forget where. Anyway, it's in Indonesia. So a lot of people, they go to the temple and then they ask Buddha Amitabha or Sakyamuni or others for something, and they know that nothing comes free. So there's a mutually generated effect, meaning you have to be willing to pay for it in somehow. So if you commit sin, they know you have to pay for it with suffering. If you want something, you have to be willing to give something up. Sometimes it's about giving up money. Other times it's about maybe giving up some of your virtue. So if you willfully at the temple say, please let me make a lot of money. A lot of these people associate that when they have 4 kids and they all are retarded, and they have mental problems, they think later on in deep regret that was the divine beings coming and taking a payment. I must raise all these children.
Right.
And they're sentient beings reincarnated too. So I'm given the task of, even though I have all this money, now I have to willfully take care of them and fulfill my obligation to the gods that bless me. That's what they actually believe.
Right.
So it is visualization in Buddhism, at least. I don't know how far it goes in the Hindu traditions, is you are getting something for something. It's always a trade-off. Mutual generation, dualistic nature, whatever you want to believe it as. But planning to do something like, I'm going to go to work tomorrow at 10 o'clock is not visualization. You have to be willfully saying that I'm willing to give up whatever the gods demand of me if you make me rich, if you do this, if you do that.
Right.
And at least the masters I've talked to, and they say anything that you wish, which is why you have to empty your mind of desire, will be granted to you. But divine beings as well as demons know that. So they'll come and give it to you, but then they'll come and they want to ask for that price or take it. And if you refuse to pay for it, they will take it by force.
Right. Oh, and
they say.
And another person, Ortho Christos, had a nice point. Visualization is not wrong. Do not fall into Protestantism or scholasticism. And then Olaf, one of our good buddies, said, I agree with Justin. Is it about thy kingdom come or my kingdom come?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that is a great way to phrase that. But yeah, that sort of exchange mentality of spirituality or divinity, that's the basis of magic. That's the basis of, well, I think it actually colors penal substitution, atonement, and Christian theology.
Yep, 100%. When I didn't know the true definition of that, and when I heard those explanations from Orthodoxy, I was blown away. I didn't know that was so similar.
Right.
You're paying for everything.
Right. And exactly, and then you can go to a sola fide to an extreme degree where it's already been paid for.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like, because this
100%.
exchange mentality. Well, Christ has already died. God's already got his. He's already been redeemed from the failings of Adam. Therefore, I'm forgiven, and it really ultimately doesn't matter what I do as long as I profess faith and have complete faith. Because recently, speaking with a Protestant, they were talking about, well, I was looking up, and they said Orthodoxy believes in faith and works. I only believe in faith, and He said, and then they go, well, the works they only occur because somebody has true faith. And I said, okay, well, that's what Orthodoxy. You have faith, then you live your faith out by your works, but those go together. You can't have one without the other. And they're like, oh, well, I guess that makes a lot of sense. And the conversation basically ended after that.
Yeah, I think the mentality, like you said, the similarities come from the idea that sin and the fall and karma are all equal in that they are substances, and no human can pay off such a great substance and consume. Literally, they think that in Buddhism, the Buddhas consume the karma and the Shiji that they still retain, and you see a Buddhist statue like this with they call a Falun or a Wan symbol.
Yeah.
They think that's forever rotating on every part of his body, consuming karma throughout the universe, and then it reverses and spits out primordial virtue and heal the universe. No, literally, that's what they think. So they're literally like a lawnmower chopping up karma and changing it into something that's usable and positive, so offsetting the negative of this physical substance. And they don't understand that evil and sin is not a substance.
Yep.
So therefore, act in personhood or act in substance is not the same thing.
Yep. Totally agree.
Totally different.
Totally agree. Well, I think that basically about wraps up our conversation. Some of our friends in the comment was saying planning with goals in regards to our conversation on visualization. Planning with goals in mind is not the same as visualization for creative ventures. I think Jay Dyer was talking about this when speaking about Plato's Ion. I'm no expert, though. And then Copper Spartan, who posed the question for us, said thanks for the clarification on that. And thank you for the question. That was actually a pretty insightful question.
Yeah, pursuit of money and pursuit of bad things will bring you a lot of heartache and problems and trouble and probably send you to hell. But right. That's not exactly the same thing. So is it going to incur demon possession? I don't know. If you run around murdering people,
that will probably do it.
And taking all their money just so you can be rich because you don't think that you're going to pay a price. Well, you're already being controlled by demons because they removed all fear of eternal payment for that.
Yep. Pretty soon you're going to be Gil Bates. Olaf said, when Copper Spartan said that, I was thinking of visualization as meditation/prayer, where you focus your will on temporal gains. Right. Okay. Yeah. And Olaf, I see what you mean there. I was just reading I didn't catch maybe the context of everything. I was just reading the question, but agreed. We have to be careful what we're visualizing for. For me, I'm very conscious of trying to walk this delicate line between praying for God's will, which is first and foremost, and then praying that things can develop or work out in a way in which you're trying to work towards, whether that be building a career, finding the individual that you're going to spend the rest of your life with to build a family. How does one navigate the sort of being pulled towards these things, one by necessity and also by strong desire, and try to not fall victim to the world itself? Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? At the same time, you ask for it. It's like, well, if you just give me this, I'm not asking for the world here, but no.
Yeah, I think it comes in the form of the pagan statement of seek without pursuit. If you go out there and you work and you do it ethically, it is by just the product of hard work that you're going to make your business better. So if you ask to be rich so you can have bitches and hoes, that's totally different. So the idea of working hard and asking for the blessing on your work, from what I see, because I don't see how that is a bad thing. Please bless my work, but you can have anything you want in the world. You just got to be willing to pay for it. That's what my dad always say. So the
Right.
idea that you can serve God and money at the same time, maybe your success is distracting you from being a good person and being a good Christian and going to the church with your family.
Right.
And they're always there and you're never there. So you got all this money, and somebody's obviously helping you. Maybe God, maybe just your own works, maybe demons, maybe whatever. But I mean, he's already established it. You should make money, and if you have a gift of making a lot of money, then without distracting and becoming bad, then good for you.
Right.
But I personally don't think any real religious pursuit would ever tell you to beg and ask for wealth, because that's
right.
Or
right.
I want to find a good woman. I want you, please bless my work so I can do well and provide and tithe. I mean, I want a car, and I mean all those things. I don't think that's necessarily wrong. It's just I want a car. I want a Lamborghini, and I want this.
Right.
It's totally different.
Right. No, it definitely is. It definitely is. But even I don't know. I'm always in my head anyway, so sometimes I get caught up in how worldly some of my pursuits are, although I don't think I'm that worldly, but asking for things, trying to find a relationship, trying to find the right person. And then, like you said, I kind of like the idea of ask without pursuit, because I don't know, it seems like that's where you get into problems is the and it's another delicate line, is how much of you putting effort into attain something versus doing maybe what you know to be right and allowing it to occur more naturally, if you will, or more by God's will. It's hard to navigate that, because King David, he certainly had a will. He was certainly going after his stuff. So it's like, I don't know.
We also have to be careful of not being superstitious, because how many friends have I had when I was a Jehovah's Witness that were like, my life was messed up. I was doing drugs. I prayed, and 5 minutes later, knock, 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 witnesses came and knocked on my door. I knew that was God. Well, I mean, you can look at it in a ratio that at least you're not doing this, but it doesn't mean
right.
It doesn't mean what you think it means.
Right.
It could have been like the Baha'i guys. It could have been Mormons. It could have been anything.
Right.
And you don't know why that happened. So you can't associate it with, I prayed, then it happened, so it must be approved by God.
Right.
I prayed for a wife, and this woman showed up at my door with tattoos up and down her arms and smelled like smoke. And, so we always assume, because we're all so selfish, but we also assume just because God gives us all these multiple goods to choose from, that we have to take the first thing that comes.
Right.
I think we have free will to choose, but not be so picky that we're like, well, I'm not scrubbing toilets to make a living. I'll do anything to feed my family, but I'm not scrubbing toilets. That's it. Forget it.
Right.
Sometimes you got to scrub toilets. Guess what? Because we ain't all that.
Amen. I think that's a great way to end the conversation there. So thanks for coming on, brother. How can people find you and get a hold of you? And Olaf said, thanks for having Justin back. Absolutely, bro. And Troy said, nice combo, fellas. So thank you guys. Glad to.
I got a couple good articles on there. Go to whywefight.info. And then my Twitter page is a little, it's like a trench warfare, but you can still go there. That's at whywefight2020. And I got my YouTube channel too. I'll be updating soon, but you can find all that stuff through the website. So just go to whywefight.info. And we'd love to hear from people. It's a two-way street, so I love being able to interact with finding out, like I said, why we are facing this struggle in our civilization right now. And the way we can fix it is return back to our roots, and the roots is the church.
Absolutely.
Roots is the church.
Absolutely. All right, brother. Well, thanks again. God bless you and your family. Hope everything continues to go well, given the context and the situation we find ourselves in. And we'll definitely have to do this again soon. And thank you again for Nick for the super chat. Greatly appreciate that. Always do. So thank you again, brother, if you're still with us, for the $4.99. Thank you very much. So anyways.
Great being on. Great being on. And I'll make sure to wear my mask next time.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, brother. Thanks.
Yep. Have a good one.
You want me to stay on? You there?
Yeah, one sec. The the internet, of course, isn't working right.